On today's program, Reverend Malcom Hedding has a message about anti-Semitism. We visit Magdala and learn about first-century excavations. And we meet ICEJ Canada Prayer Coordinator, Clarke. It is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. In other words, it is not the children by physical descent who are God's children, but it is the children of the promise who are regarded as Abraham's offspring.
Hello, it's my joy once again to share some biblical thoughts with you. My name is Malcom Hedding, and I'm the international spokesperson for the International Christian Embassy, Jerusalem. One of the saddest events in history has been this issue or question of anti-Semitism in the church. It is, in a way, unfathomable because the church was birthed through a Jewish Messiah, and more than that, through the Jewish people. Jesus didn't stand alone as if he came in a vacuum. The Bible tells us, history tells us, that he came in a context, and his context is the Jewish people, the whole embodiment of the people of Israel up until that time. Jesus himself acknowledged that when he said salvation is of the Jews, John chapter 4 and verse 22. And so he himself knew that while salvation is from him, he is the one who suffered in our stead. He is the one that carried our sins away. But he nevertheless recognized that salvation is of the Jews, plural, meaning that he stood on the shoulders of a people that gave his life, his ministry, and even his death, his burial and resurrection validation. Beginning with Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, David, Samuel, all the great prophets, all these people were in the plan of God, needed and required in order to set up, as it were, the ministry of Jesus of Nazareth. So how weird it is, how strange, that a body of people called the Church of the Living God can, in a way, turn against that entity that gave it birth, that entity that gave it context. In other words, we need to remember that the first church of the first century was always led by Jews. Paul, a great Jewish leader, a great Jewish preacher, a man who went to the Gentiles, who brought the Gentiles into the fold of God and his people, the house of God. Wow, a Jewish apostle reaching out to a Gentile world. Took a lot of courage, took a lot of determination, and took a lot of hard work, trial, difficulty, and persecution. And he himself made it clear that the context of the church is Jewish, because in his day there was no New Testament. There was, in fact, no New Testament that you could buy down the road in the street or have in a scroll. The only scriptures they had were the Hebrew scriptures. And when Paul says that all scripture is inspired and given of God, that the man of God may be equipped for every good work, he's not talking about the Hebrew scriptures, about the New Testament, should I say, but he's talking about the Hebrew scriptures. Of course, the New Testament is fully inspired. We accept that and know that. But to be absolutely true, he was in the context speaking about the Hebrew scriptures. In other words, the life, the ministry, and the mission of the first church that reached out into the Gentile world and brought to it the wonderful message of salvation was Jewish. So how is it that this church eventually could turn against the Jewish people, harass them, persecute them, murder them, kill them, and do such things against them that is unbelievable? Some people say, well, they weren't Christians who did that. No, they were. Martin Luther was certainly a Christian. We are indebted to him for what he did. He reformed the church. He brought back the great message of salvation. He brought us the light and the revelation of God again through his preaching, through the translation of the Bible that he did, and his marvelous expositions. And yet, he became an anti-Semite. He said such things against the Jewish people. He advocated for such things against the Jewish people that finally culminated in the Holocaust. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not my thinking or my theory. This is truth. Anti-Semitism is a diabolical thing in the church, and the church has cooperated with it. It is fully responsible historically. We cannot just say, oh, it was the devil. No, it was the devil and us. People who willingly gave their right arm of power to destroy the Jewish people in the name of Jesus. How can this be? The only way we can resist this thing is by proper teaching. By teaching the people of God the central role that Israel plays in God's plan of world redemption. Paul is very careful to teach that in all of his writings. In the book of Romans, he says that their distinctive calling and blessing and privilege has been to give to the world the oracles of God. In Romans chapter 9, he says that from them has come Jesus of Nazareth. In Romans chapter 11, he says that the gifts and calling of God over the nation of Israel has never been removed. In other words, they will always be the vehicle of world redemption, the means by which God brings his word and purpose into the world. We should be grateful. In Romans, he also says we are indebted to them because we share in their spiritual things. They are not ours. It is teaching. It is solid, good, biblical teaching that will protect the church against this evil of anti-Semitism. May God help us to do it.
As Jesus walked beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw Simon and his brother Andrew casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. "Come, follow me," Jesus said, "and I will send you out to fish for people." At once they left their nets and followed him.
So this was the marketplace of the first century port, and as we were filming just outside here,
out here was the port.
you have also
market.
little walls and structures,
yes.
so you can see where they had maybe storage, where they kept fish, where they kept their tackle, where they brought supplies for their boats, where people were sending stuff over to the other side, to Capernaum, or bringing it back, whatever. So this was a very busy place. You don't build a solid platform like this unless you have traffic. It's too much work to build it. So this is prepared for heavy duty traffic. And we have a couple of historical references. This is first century. And we know from Flavius Josephus that 240 boats rescued the women and children from Magdala before the Romans came in with their swords to deal with the Jewish rebellion. Everybody in the world almost knows that Jerusalem was destroyed in 70 by the Romans. A lot of people who look at movies know that Masada fell 2 years later. Very few people know that the first battle was here. The rebellion started in Caesarea Maritima, was squashed. They went into the countryside, they gathered here in Galilee, and this was a focal point, one of the focal points. And this story is amply described by Flavius Josephus because he himself actually led the rebellion against the Romans here. He organized them. He's fortified the northern wall in the city, which you saw over there in the archaeology. Right. He tells us that fish processed in Magdala was sold in Rome. No wonder, because Caesarea Maritima was the most important port in the Roman Empire, the most beautiful port that Herod the Great had built. So the infrastructure was there for that type of... Now we found the fish processing units with the shafts, with the steps and the basins where they were tossing the fish. And we know from the Greek name for Magdala was Taricheia, which means tossing. And that's part of the pickling process of pickling the fish so that it would be preserved for the long trip to Rome, for sale in Rome. Now put yourself in the context of fishermen in the Sea of Galilee. If you want to get an extra penny on the pound, you do export. They bring it here, and there's a port big enough to receive it. And then they take it and bring it over to these pickling units, and there we have 10 of them. That is an industrial process, it's like a factory, and it's exported. A couple of days walk
boxed in salt, wouldn't it?
Probably, yeah. They'd be well pickled first.
So the port was Caesarea And you can see that evidence there as well.
Well, it's only a couple of days from here to,
Yes,
with mules to go to Caesarea. So it's all very practical. And this would also explain why there's such an income here that allows the building of such an ornate synagogue that's completely frescoed, completely mosaiced, so well built, and then the ritual purification baths that are extraordinary in terms of level. So we're now discovering here in the 1st century a very stratified society, definitely a very professional or qualified working class that's able to build, a professional working crew for stone, for engineering, for planning, for organization. So for the fish industry, there has to be a management level, there has to be connecting people, salespeople. So you have a complex society here. And that's a very interesting observation about how we have to rethink the society in which Jesus moved. We can remember again what we saw upstairs with the columns, that we have Mary Magdalene, Susanna and Johanna, the wife of Herod Antipas's finance minister. Now Herod Antipas is the king. His most trusted person is in charge of his finances, probably. And Herod Antipas and Jesus weren't on the best of terms. And yet his most trusted man's wife was probably secretly or quietly, discreetly, a disciple. And then Luke's Gospel chapter 8 in the first 3 verses goes on to say that these women and many others supported Jesus from their substance. And Mary Magdalene is ahead of Susanna and Johanna, and you normally recognize benefactors in order of importance in any work, and from antiquity that's been the same. We can see it on monuments, even in the synagogue in Cana. You have people that are honored for building the synagogue. So, and you have bigger letters for bigger donors.
True.
So then this means that if Johanna, the wife of the finance minister, and they had deep pockets, there weren't the same ethics commissions ruling tax collection at the time and checking on them in congressional reports and so forth. So then you have to say, wow, these are a very top level of society, the creme de la creme in the socioeconomic categories that are involved in Jesus' discipleship. And these women have been touched by him, so he was able to reach their hearts, he was able to reach their soul, and they felt inspired by him. And then we could think about these people coming through here. They want to go to Capernaum to hear him preach, because he's living in Capernaum. And they want to go to Bethsaida. Somebody got cured up near the Mount of Beatitudes. They're curious, they'd like to see this person that's raised from the dead, the daughter of Jairus. So they used the boats. Who walked on this floor? I love to make this little comment, how Pope Francis says that pastors should smell like the sheep, which means we shouldn't live aloof.
Right, live among them.
Yesterday we had 74 pastors from the Assemblies of God here in this chapel. And you know, I said, well, you probably don't follow Pope Francis, a little quip there. But if Pope Francis came here, he might have to say the pastors need to smell like fish, because Jesus would have smelled like fish. Like the fishermen are living, they're handling this all the time. So Jesus is among fishermen. They haul their fish in here. And Jesus got on the boat here and went across. They crossed to the other side. That language is frequent in the gospel, and we only probably get 2% of all the things that did happen in the gospels, in the text of the gospel of what happened in Jesus' ministry here in Galilee. So now this place becomes very special. You know, it's very possible that Peter stood on these stones. Can you imagine Jesus waiting for the boat to come in or waiting for them to unload? And there are a couple of people that are coming over, they're dealing with something. And he notices Mary Magdalene going by, and he says something that's more for her than for them. And it happens 2 or 3 times, and she's beginning to say, wow, this man is different. This person has a different message. He's touching my heart, he's touching my mind, he's touching my life. So then, at some point then, there's a connection. She said, I need to talk to him, I need help. So this is where this is happening. And now we can see the structure here. We have seating like in the synagogue, columns like in the synagogue, And we sent some of the fresco samples from the synagogue to a lab in Germany, and they analyzed and identified the pigments and reproduced them to decorate this building.
These would be natural pigments, would they not?
So then imagine now you're here in a space that's authentic first century, and I even dare to say that maybe it's even more probable that Jesus walked on this floor than he walked in the synagogue. Something very interesting happened last summer. A friend of mine said, "Can you please give a special tour to a friend of mine who's coming?" So a mutual friend introduced us, and this man was New Age, an entrepreneur from the US, a very successful entrepreneur. And when he was totally imbued with New Age thinking, when he came here and he understood this space, he took off his shoes, then he took off his socks, and he spent 10 minutes walking here. And he wanted to get the energy from the stones where Jesus walked. So this space is touching a lot of people, but obviously, first of all, in its visuals, it's telling us this is like the synagogue. And that has extraordinary meaning, because if we go to the synagogue, we can ask the question, who was using the synagogue? Well, obviously Jewish people. They built it. But among the Jewish people in the first century, they had a surprise in their synagogues one day, another day. A carpenter from Nazareth came by.
A Jew.
And he opened up the scriptures for them. And they called him Rabbi. It's very interesting that when Mary Magdalene experiences the risen Christ, her first word is Rabboni, my teacher. So this rabbi's in their synagogue. And then our synagogue, Christian talking, is closed down by 67, 68 at the latest, before temple destruction. And who's using the synagogue, let's say from Pentecost to 67, 68? Well, Jewish people. But if we look at the Acts of the Apostles, we see Peter and John coming out of the temple after the mid-afternoon prayer. And Peter cures the paralytic, right? There's that miracle. So if the apostles, who are the prime first row co-workers of Jesus' ministry, are going to the temple, everybody's going to the temple. They didn't stop going to the temple. They didn't stop going to the synagogues. So who's using the synagogue? Jesus' disciples. Among the crowd of Jews. Maybe a significant portion here in Galilee. So then, what does that tell us? Why did we find the synagogue today, at the beginning of the third millennium, the 21st century? Would it be fair to suspect that Providence wants us to look at what unites us? Because 2,000 years ago, they weren't divided into Presbyterian, Methodist, Assembly of God, Orthodox, Coptic. We were still one family of Jesus' disciples, and we were not yet separated from the Jews. So we had so much in common. And now we will never roll back completely the fragmentation and the development of peculiar and particular traditions to each faith community. But we do need to look at each other and say, you know, hold on a moment, we share a lot. We cannot afford to hate each other. We cannot afford to have negative prejudice toward each other. We need to discover why each community is doing this, what lies behind it, what's the significance, what's the intention, what are we pursuing? Are we on an ego trip? Just our understanding? Are we able to embrace the whole of the body? Are we able to open our hearts for the complete working of Christ in his body, in the church, in the world, in our time? So I think this discovery has been a great gift for us at this time.
Up next, ICEJ Canada Prayer Coordinator, Jackie Clarke.
Hi, my name is Jackie Clarke, and I'm the Prayer Director of ICEJ Canada. And I've been the Prayer Director now for 10 years, since 2009. And it's been a real experience for me. And It's wonderful just praying for Israel. I should mention about Israel because that's why we're there. We're praying for Israel. And we have 3 separate prayer groups. We have Intercession for Israel prayer group, which is done at a church in Toronto, the Catch the Fire Church, where we meet once a month on Sunday. And we have the ICEJ 62 prayer meeting, where we do this webinar style, where we connect with our prayer group across Canada from coast to coast. And the other one is a more local one, ICEJ prayer meeting. And this is done in a private home. And just local people around, we gather together, we come together. And this is also once a month that we do this. And we get together, and basically what we focus on is praying for Israel. And we keep up with the news, all the latest, what's going on there, what we need to pray into. And we also wait on the Lord to hear what He has to say, because the news media might not be reporting the whole thing, as we know. So we need to get the truth coming out from Israel, and listen to what the Lord is saying, what He's saying, what we need to pray about at this time. So it requires kind of a strategy there, and hearing from the Lord. So that's what we do, and I love doing it. I love meeting new people at our groups. It attracts various people, and they come for various reasons. Some, they in it for the long haul. Some of them, they're only short term, and it's all good. And people have a real heart for Israel, and that's why they come out to these prayer meetings. We see results from our prayers. We see things happening in Israel, how God is working in bringing about His plans for Israel through our prayers. And it's an exciting thing to see it unfold before your very eyes.
Hi, I'm Donna Holbrook, National Executive Director of the International Christian Embassy, Jerusalem, Canada. And I'm happy to say that we're in Israel at Rahavot, at the Chaim Weizmann Institute property. He was the first president of the State of Israel as a modern state. And when his wife passed away, they bequeathed back to the State of Israel their home and 12 acres. So here today is the growth of children's research. It's an exciting property that's enjoyed by everyone, and we've come here on the tour. This is my segue to the Shomer Keep of Israel estate giving. And we had one example I'd like to share with you. Audrey Ruth Peer was one of our members who came to know about the work of the ICEJ in bringing comfort here. And she passed away as an only child and with no children of her own. She had 2 regrets in her life. One was that she didn't have children, and the other one that she never came to the land of Israel. So when she passed away, she left an estate, part of an estate, which was, and we've had several people give, but I talked to her friend Pat, who she knew for about 60 years, and I wanted to make certain that the funds that she had given to us would be used in a way that she would have wanted. It was not designated. So I had a list of the ICEJ aid, the long-term, the short-term, the emergency kinds of funds. I shared it with her friend Pat, who knew her for over 60 years. And I said, Pat, what do you think Audrey would like, how we use her funds? And so it was decided, we went through the list, and it was decided that they met, I should add that they met at the University of Toronto in the music department. And so music was important to her, children also important to her. And so we undertook the fund, and we divided it 4 ways equally. And it went to a petting zoo for children, for orphan boys near Tel Aviv. It also went to build 2 new music rooms at Bet Yosef up at Haifa, which is a very large community center. We also helped to complete a playground for another orphanage to the south of Israel. And then it enabled us to restore our scholarship for Christian young adults. This is a legacy that one of our members left, and I want to tell you how carefully we administer that. And her name, even though she was never in Israel, her name is in the land on those 3 projects, and it continued for 5 years on our Canadian scholarship for Christian leaders who have never been to Israel, who are in the age group of 17 to 30, roughly. And so now we have had 5 years, times 6, 30 scholarship. These are new ambassadors back to Canada who are sharing their love of Israel and their understanding for the Jewish people.
Thank you for joining us today, and be sure to visit our website at www.icejcanada.tv or call us at 1-866-324-9133. And for our Canadian residents, be sure to ask for your free Canada-Israel pin. Through your contributions to ICEJ Canada, you can participate by giving to Haifa Home for Holocaust Survivors, Women at Risk Red Carpet Project, Operation Life Shield Bomb-Proof Shelters, Mentoring Programs, Aliyah Support, Children's Projects, Israel in Crisis, Israel Aid, Magan David Adam Emergency Services, Christian Friends of Yad Vashem, Scholarships for Young Adult Leaders, ICEJ Canada Media Fund, Gift Estate Securities Fund.